Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are doing well and enjoying the beautiful weather that is outside. Today we're going to talk about a little bit more touchy subject, and this is one that you're probably going to have to read the blog to get a lot of the details for. So, the blog will be linked. Make sure you check it out for the full details. But the one thing that most birth professionals or experts tend to get wrong, right? Any guesses? If you would talk to most birth professionals, especially if you live in Nebraska or Arkansas, where the laws around birth are very complicated, they would tell you that it is a risky thing, that things could happen very quickly and go wrong in a hurry, and it needs to be handled in a hospital setting. And that's not true. Yes, things can go wrong, but most of the time, for a majority of women, birth is a low-risk and natural process. A famous midwife has a saying, and it's called "let well enough be," or something along those lines. Most, in hospital settings especially, that's not honored at all. Things are to happen in a certain timeline, and if it doesn't fit that timeline, then they do external procedures and things to keep it in their timeline and interventions, which just usually leads to a cascade of things that wind up complicating things, and then you get the emergency situations, right? So it's in those situations, when you start messing with the birth process, that is when you start to see the issues. So I'm going to use animals as an example because I've worked with a lot of animals, right? So in animals, when a female is about ready to give birth, and I know humans are part of animals, but I'm speaking four-legged creatures here. Or primates, really. Not human animals. They go to a place where they feel comfortable, and safe, and secure. Because they know when they're in the middle of birth, they're at their most vulnerable, and it is the most dangerous spot for them. Because in the middle of birth, you really can't move very quickly. If that spot gets disrupted, especially early on, like a predator comes by or a human that they're not used to, oftentimes the birth process will stop. It'll slow down or it'll halt altogether. I have seen a cow who gets nervous be in middle of active pushing labor, get up and walk off because she no longer felt safe in that spot. The thing that always interests me is that we as humans seem to think we're above that, when in reality that birth process, those down to the core roots, goes into our primal brain, and nobody really understands how all of that works together. We know different steps of the birth. We know the different hormones involved. We know that baby often talks back to mom somehow. But how all of those intricate processes and how much of what triggers the next phase and what causes this to slow or this to speed based on this, we don't understand. Birth professionals don't understand this either. But yet we always try and force things to go in our timeline. With my son, if I would have been in a hospital, I wouldn't have given birth naturally, because he was taking his sweet time. And when I say his sweet time, I mean his very, very sweet time. Labor started at 6:30 that morning, and he wasn't born till probably 10:30 that night. He just wasn't in a hurry. And you know what? That's okay. Because by him not being in a hurry and by me not being forced to go faster than he was ready or my body was willing to go, I didn't tear. He was a huge baby, but I didn't tear because my body was allowed to give and stretch and take its time. That's not the case in the hospital. I would have been put on Pitocin because labor was going slow, and probably would have wound up in another C-section, honestly. That, along with all the other emotional issues that happen between me and hospitals. Like, we just don't get along. I know this. That's why I chose to home birth. If we look at birth historically, we're going to take a step back in time. It wasn't until about the mid-20th century that birth became a hospital procedure. Prior to that, midwives attended mothers in the comfort of their own home, where they were. They let them be. They assisted if they were needed, and that was it. In the 20th century, we started to see the introduction of narcotics and anesthetics during the birth process, which then moved the birth into the hospital, which at the time especially was a primarily male-dominated field. Nothing against men. It's just they don't understand. They didn't, especially at that time, understand a lot of these intricate things, and by giving that mother narcotics or anesthesia to lessen the pain, you were also taking away all these other channels. So now labor was complicated. This was also about the time where women weren't allowed to birth in whatever position they felt like. You started birthing on your back because that was the easiest for a doctor to get access to see what was going on, to help if needed. Instead of being able to use gravity, you'd be able to use movement. So I'm going to challenge you now and challenge your thought process. We could go on for a long time on just the history of birth, but I'm not going to because I want to keep this short. What happens if instead us as human mothers would do what animal mothers do? Instead of going to the hospital where there's unfamiliar noises, there's disruptions, there's monitoring, what if she just stayed home? Women do it all over the world and they give birth at home. But in the United States, especially, that's a taboo subject. Because birth isn't safe, right? But birth is safe. Yes, there are complications. Yes, it can happen. We also have access to hospitals fairly close by. The closest hospital to me with an emergency room is still 20 minutes. And an ambulance, that's not really that far though. And honestly, that's a good place for hospitals. They are excellent at emergency care and life-saving protocols. And doing that emergency steps to save lives. Doing things and being intricated in the process of a normal, uncomplicated birth, they're not exactly the best place, honestly, because they can complicate the birth and then lead to all these other issues of stalled labor, Pitocin to speed the labor up, now baby's in distress, now, well, baby can't handle this anymore. Well, if you hadn't have given him the Pitocin, the baby would have been able to tell the mom, hey, contractions are a little hard down here, like I need a little bit more time. And mom would have backed off the oxytocin just a little bit. Naturally. You can't do that with a Pitocin pump. Baby becomes in distress. What's the next thing? You're in an emergency C-section, or if they're already descending in the birth canal, you're using forceps or vacuum extraction. Mom is probably being scarred, physically and emotionally. Episiotomy to make more room, when really none of that's actually necessary most of the time. So that's my little blurb, or little opinion on birth. Go ahead, subscribe to the blog. It's in the comments, and then you'll get these straight to your email. hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube, and check out the blog in the notes. Talk to you later.